Welcome to the first ever Veteran Nexus Letter Live with Dr. David Geier. My name is Dr. David Geier, triple board certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, and anti-aging and regenerative medicine expert. I help military veterans by writing Nexus letters that argue that your orthopedic injuries and conditions are connected to your military training and service so you can get the compensation you deserve. This is our first attempt at this. Those of you that have followed me on my main YouTube channel where I've got close to 120,000 subscribers, I've been doing this, I did it weekly for a while, nightly, like every weeknight for a while, and then went to weekly, and now it's down to monthly. But I've done it for 4 years on that channel. But this is the first time doing it over here. This is a little bit of an experiment. If it goes well, we'll keep with it and stick with it. If this just bombs completely, it's no problem for me. I'm happy to not do it. But if you are not familiar with that, what this is basically your opportunity to ask a question about orthopedic injuries as they pertain to service connection, Nexus letters, DBQs, the process, that kind of thing. This is not medical advice, and I actually have a whole other show. That's what that other show is, explaining what a labral tear is and best treatments for labral tear. That's not necessarily what we'll do here, but we can talk about, is this type of injury something that can be secondary to that type of injury, or could something like that develop as a result of wear and tear from the military? We could talk about lack of service records, that kind of thing, and that's the purpose of this show. Again, like the other shows, everything I do, I am not giving medical advice because I haven't seen you, I haven't examined you, looked at x-rays, MRIs. This is meant for information and educational purposes only. If you do want to answer or ask a question, by all means, this is the place to do that. If you're not familiar with how YouTube live shows go, you put the question in the chat, not in the comments below the video. It's more technical than it's worth explaining, but I can't see the comments. I'm not actually in YouTube right now. It's getting sent to YouTube. So leave it in the chat where I can see it. For instance, if you're trying to figure it out, Mike here posted that in the chat, and that's if you see his comment, post it there. I stay as long as there's questions, and I've done live shows on the other channel where nobody asked questions and we were here like 2 minutes, and then I've done those that lasted an hour. I just did one a little while ago and we had a good turnout, but not all that many questions, so we were done in 13-14 minutes. What I will do, I probably won't do it much here today at least, but we'll do it, assuming we kind of move forward with these, is that I'll start these shows after the sort of brief intro, sort of explaining how to do it, the chat and all of that again, is probably talk about a topic that's just on my mind for 3 or 4 minutes and then sort of get to questions. So if you're not, hey, I don't necessarily have a question, but I do just want to hear what he has to say about the process and one particular aspect of it, I will do that, and you feel free to comment. I would love to hear your thoughts. The one that people have been asking about sort of off and on, but I don't know that I'm going to talk about it today, but this may be something I put out there for our next live show, is this idea of, will the VA ultimately shut this whole process down, at least as it pertains to outside physicians arguing on behalf of veterans through Nexus letters, outside physicians doing DBQs. And I have some thoughts on that, but that gets to a much bigger thing that I could go on for 20 or 30 minutes, so I won't do that necessarily here. But I do welcome your questions. Since it is up here, I'll put it up. Mike G. Travel Poker. I'm curious what that's all about, Mike. Doc, sent you an email this afternoon looking for your reply. I only showed this because I literally just finished my email as I was between shows, answered 30 or 40 emails, and I didn't see that, Mike. So if I may have and just missed the name. So if you don't get a response from me tonight, send it again or send it to there's different ways to get in touch with us, but try me again, contact at drdavidgeier.com. You can get directly to me, Jennifer, my assistant, Jennifer at drdavidgeier.com. Either of those get to us, but I didn't see it, but again, I possibly missed it. I did get a couple questions in that batch of 30 or so that I just answered that were general. They would have been perfect for this show, so they're probably worth discussing. One was wanting to know about sleep apnea and obesity, and wanting to argue that he became obese due to an injury that caused him to make it hard to exercise, and then that obesity led to obstructive sleep apnea. if you don't know me, I focus on, as an orthopedic surgeon, orthopedic injuries, and I've worked with over 300 veterans now on a huge number of Nexus letters and DBQs, and the vast majority of those, as you would expect, are orthopedic injuries and conditions. But I do occasionally, as sort of a, hey, can you also, I really appreciate you helping me with my ankle or knee or lumbar spine, whatever it was. I also want to submit this or that medical claim, and the one I get most commonly is obstructive sleep apnea. And I've argued it for a number of different reasons, primarily caused by the military, secondary to insomnia from the military, secondary to toxic exposures. But by far the one that seems to be coming up the most is what this veteran emailed me about just a little while ago, about arguing that, and I don't even remember what the injury was, but that injury caused him to make it hard to be able to exercise. He gained weight, actually to the point that he met the criteria for obesity, and that obesity in turn led to obstructive sleep apnea. Two things. One, and yes, you can definitely make that argument. The VA does like to push back on obstructive sleep apnea claims for any number of reasons, saying no, obesity is the most likely cause. Interestingly, I'm the chief medical expert for our local ABC and Fox stations here in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm on every Wednesday morning. The topic I'm talking about actually this Wednesday, and if I get a video, I'll try to send it out to my email list. Is a study that just came out that showed that more than half of the people with obstructive sleep apnea in this very large study, more than half did not meet the criteria for obesity. They were not obese. So it's not just obese people, people with obesity that get it. But having said that, the VA likes to say, no, obesity is more likely than whatever the argument was in the disability claim. It was the veteran being obese is the reason that he or she developed obstructive sleep apnea. And a lot of times that can be true. But having said that, in the VA's own language, there's a memorandum that they put out. I want to say it was in, I don't remember what year, I've got it somewhere, and I use it a lot. In their own language, obesity can be an intermediate step for one condition to be a secondary causation to another. Meaning, let's just take, for instance, you suffered a tibia fracture. You broke your leg in service. After that, you were just not able to run, not able to do any kind of distance exercise, quickly put on weight. Now, the VA, and there are good studies that show that being injured can lead to increased rates of sedentary behavior, and then secondarily can lead to obesity. Having said that, I've seen the VA push back on saying, well, just because he can't exercise doesn't mean he necessarily can become obese. He could diet, which that's a whole other rabbit hole. I'm not going to go down that rant. But having said that, let's just say his tibia fracture, he develops obesity. That obesity, in the VA's own language, is an intermediate step to a secondary condition. In this case, obstructive sleep apnea, which again, the VA loves to say is a high risk factor, very, very likely risk factor for obesity. So that, in my mind, is pretty close to a slam dunk. The problem is, you got to get them to actually consider that argument, and you need it well written. That's not something I would think that a veteran could just file that on his or her own. I think you would need a physician of some sort to argue that. It's more of a legal argument than a medical argument, but then citing the sources showing obesity as a risk factor for obstructive sleep apnea, and then the orthopedic injury, the risk factors for developing obesity. But yes, that can be done. The other one I got today, just a little while ago, was a veteran asking me if scoliosis could be, if somebody was service connected for scoliosis, could that then they do a secondary claim for a cervical spine degenerative condition. One, you can get service connected for scoliosis. It's not as easy as you would think, but for a lot of reasons it's so common in the population. So it's a little bit like flat feet, pes planus, where if it's noted on the entrance exam, then you've got to show it progressed beyond what would be expected by beyond the point of natural progression, like you have to do with mild asymptomatic pes planus noted on an entrance exam. Now, if it's scoliosis that developed due to military wear and tear, which is not terribly common, but I suppose it could happen, and you got that service connected, then yes, I think it could be done. The trick with scoliosis is that would be maybe a factor in the development of something like degenerative disc disease of the cervical spine or spinal stenosis, but probably not terribly likely to be a causative factor for those conditions in the neck. Maybe that plus years of wear and tear and physically demanding duties that stress the cervical spine, maybe you could make that argument. But if you manage to get scoliosis cervix connected, I think you could at least make a rational argument. It's just not the very clear-cut, I've got left knee arthritis, now I developed right knee arthritis, that type of thing that is much more straightforward. It's possible. It's similar in that sense to people that have lumbar spine degenerative conditions and they want to make their cervical spine secondary to it. That's not as easy an argument as you would think. And so there aren't a lot of great studies supporting that. There's ways to argue it, but it's not super easy. That would be a similar one, the scoliosis to cervical spine. All right, a couple of questions have come in. Let's see, Mike says, I sent it to Jennifer. Yeah, Jennifer's my assistant. Now I can't get it to pop up on the screen. There we are. She's fantastic. She can help with lots of things, process-related stuff, and lots of. She's fantastic. Veterans love her. If you read all my testimonials on various places, a whole lot of them are about her. So she'll get any kind of question. If she can't answer it, she'll get it to me. So we will definitely be in touch. Daniel says, I appreciate you answering all the emails. Yeah, talked about service-connected scoliosis. Yes, so yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. It's doable, but it's not the slam dunk that a lot of secondary conditions are. The VA, I will say, I said I was going to sort of generally talk about a topic, and I probably need to go into this in greater detail at some point. The secondary conditions, at least when it comes to orthopedics, especially there's so many like knee arthritis and hip arthritis and lumbar spines where you alter an antalgic gait or a limp, an alteration of the kinetic chain that puts increased stress on the joints on the opposite side of the body or the joints above or below that joint or on the lumbar spine. And I have nothing against nurse practitioners and PAs at all. I've worked with them my whole career. But these examiners that are, again, nurse practitioners and PAs largely, or even physicians, but they're not orthopedic based. They're usually family medicine or medicine. Just say there's no evidence that this one orthopedic condition can cause another. And I always think, if you ask 10 orthopedic surgeons, 10 are going to say yes, it absolutely can be linked, or 9 at worst. And then you just find studies to show it, and you present those studies and you argue it. But if you don't have an orthopedic surgeon making that case, those secondary orthopedic claims lose a lot. And I will tell you, 85% of the veterans that reach out to me have been denied before they come to me. They come to me looking for somebody with more credentials than the examiner. So I've read easily 1,000 denial letters, and I just watch these very logical secondary arguments get denied, and they're just wrong, quite honestly. I mean, there's absolutely left hip arthritis absolutely can be secondary to left knee arthritis. And so anyway, I don't even remember how I got off on that tangent, but that's one of the really frustrating things. But the secondary conditions typically need help, needs the Nexus letter and somebody with credentials to argue the case, medical, orthopedic, whatever. Have I written any letters? Write tons and tons and tons of letters on the cervical spine and lumbar spine, and lots of conditions on secondary conditions. Scoliosis, not so much. Scoliosis is a hard thing to get service connected. It would really depend on the circumstances. That'd be something I'd really want to see the records and see if I can figure out. For the same reasons I talked about the pes planus, that's what you would have to show. Institute of Applied Development, gout or arthritis secondary to the MOS. So arthritis absolutely could be secondary to the, whatever somebody's MOS and the wear and tear. Gout would be tough. It's not to say it couldn't be done, but that's an inflammatory medical condition. I'm not sure that I necessarily would know how to argue that. I could do some research on that. Gout, you would think, because it's like ball of the foot and can affect a number of joints. It's not really an orthopedic problem. The rheumatologists deal with gout. Having said that, I'm not off the top of my head sure how I would argue gout as secondary to military service. Absolutely could argue arthritis. Even outside of that whole presumptive thing, condition thing where arthritis, you have to present it within a year of leaving military service. I've helped veterans win 15, 20, 30 years later where they developed significant knee arthritis, hip arthritis, lumbar spine, shoulder. There are lots of things that can easily be done, but gout would be tricky. Let's see. Is Mike? I'm not sure. I may have missed that in the comments. All right, John Tucker. I may have just seen you on my other show. I may be wrong, and if I had said that and I'm wrong, I apologize. Hey, Doc Geier, service-connected plantar fascia, no improvement after surgery. Plantar fascia in the other foot, no surgery. Do you have to get surgery to get a 30% rating? Shoot, the funny thing is I was just looking at this today for pes planus, and I passed over the plantar fasciitis, and because it didn't apply to the one I was writing. John, to be fair, let me look that up. Just so you know, because I do all this work outside of my medical practice. I basically look it up every time I calculate a rating. I could find it in about 15 seconds. I'm not going to make everybody watch me find the database and look it up, but I can look that up. There are certainly ways to calculate it. There are a number of diagnoses that surgery does bump it up to a certain level. Knee replacement, hip replacement would be examples of those. I don't know off the top of my head if plantar fasciitis is one of those, but I can certainly find that out. Because it's definitely worth looking into. Is arthritis and degenerative disc disease the same code rating? So I'm assuming you mean degenerative arthritis. I'm assuming we're talking degenerative disc disease and the spine, so degenerative arthritis. They're not the same diagnostic code. If I'm remembering correctly, let's just say lumbar spine. Degenerative disc disease, I think, is 5242, and actually those may actually be the same code. It's spinal stenosis that's 5238. Again, I look it up each time. I've been doing this way too long to try to keep all this in my head. It's just not a good idea. As far as the same rating, yes, they would roll that. If it's both lumbar spine, they're going to roll that into one rating. That's not two separate ratings. The only things that you would really be able to get separate ratings for in the spine would be you have degenerative disc disease, for instance, or spinal stenosis, again, rolled into one lower back lumbar spine rating. And then if you had a radiculopathy going down the right leg or left leg, those are separate ratings. Cervical spine condition and lumbar spine condition are separate ratings, but not two conditions in the same lumbar spine or two conditions in the cervical spine. Those would roll together. Let's see. John Fisher, injured my back twice in 2 weeks. That sucks, my man. I know. As somebody with a bad back, I definitely get you. 2 weeks later, woke up in extreme pain, diagnosed with herniated discs and severe spinal stenosis. Can this be? I'm not sure what the rest of that question is. Yeah, John, just let me know what your question is. Very, very difficult problem for sure. Robert Adams, 10% lumbosacral strain of degenerative disc disease. My back hurts so much all the time. Also have scoliosis. Yeah. One of the really frustrating things is severity of pain doesn't necessarily, that's a whole other rabbit hole I should talk about in an intro segment to one of these, about the ratings being overly simplistic, and sometimes people have really severe problems, but the ratings don't necessarily reflect it, and vice versa. I've seen really high ratings for people that were fairly high functioning and not that limited. It's not nearly as detailed as, say, a workers' comp rating formula book, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, I'm sure that hurts. All right. Erectile dysfunction, secondary to L5S1 lumbar issues, on and off cauda equina. Really tough. So you don't see much cauda equina because that is usually a surgical emergency and it's been treated. I have done letters for lumbar spine after the fact, after cauda equina was treated, but usually surgical. But what is interesting about that, I have written, again, I focus on orthopedic injuries, but I've got a number of vets with lumbar spine issues where I've come back and done erectile dysfunction secondary to the lumbar spine, and it's a fairly straightforward argument to make. There's good studies to support that. And that typically wins. All right, linked. So that was in relation to, I'll get linked off the screen here. Hang on just a second, John. That was, can his herniated discs and spinal stenosis be linked? Yeah, I mean, it'd be both. Very often you'd have both conditions in your lumbar spine. Is that what you're asking? Could it be service connected and linked to the military? Would depend on the circumstances. Did it occur in the military? Then yeah, it's a home run. If it's something later, then it depends on, is this a degenerative disc disease type of thing that led to the spinal stenosis and that type of thing. There's a lot of variables. That's where you'd really want somebody to review the records and see if there's a case to be made. But I think it's worth looking into for sure, if that helps. Mike, does a fusion help on claims? I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't think there is a surgery like we were talking about with plantar fasciitis or knee replacements that automatically having surgery bumps you up. Where the fusion potentially helps is that by definition, you're eliminating motion between the vertebral bodies. So overall, your cervical spine or lumbar spine range of motion is going to be less. And if you're doing it by range of motion, which is one of the common ways to do the ratings, yes, then that typically leads to a higher rating, because if there's very little forward flexion, the percents get significantly high. So yes, it can help. Not necessarily a good reason just to have the surgery. You do the surgery to relieve the pain. But having said that, yeah, that's potentially possible. All right, Builder Bob Eddy, very cool. Are Nexus letters needed to file a claim for major shoulder surgeries due to extensive airborne operations into areas of denied access that the government does not admit to? I don't know about if it would matter for anything that they is not necessarily something that the government admits. I'm not a big conspiracy guy, but let me just give as an example the toxic exposures and the things that are presumptive conditions, say to Agent Orange. If it's on the list, it's a slam dunk. You don't need any help. If it's not on the list, it's a lot of times very easy to argue. You just need a physician to show studies linking one to the other, and that's through a Nexus letter. As far as shoulder injuries, just in the grand scheme of things, if you are in service and you have a documented, say, shoulder dislocation, there's service records that show it, and it's very clear you went to follow-up PT and everything else, very easy to show that happened in service, and then you ended up needing shoulder surgery, and let's say now your shoulder, you've lost range of motion, you have sort of chronic pain in that shoulder, you probably don't even need, I'm happy to help Nexus letters, and I'm sure a lot of people would. That's pretty much a slam dunk where it's evidence of happening in service. If it's wear and tear and you're arguing, either because you didn't have service records, or maybe you went once and it was just not a big deal, but you didn't go over a long period of time, and now a year later or 5 years later, that shoulder is really giving you a lot of trouble, but clearly related to all the demanding physical duties putting stress on the shoulder. Yes, I think you can make that argument, but absolutely you're going to need a Nexus letter, or they're just going to say, hey, denied for lack of service treatment records, denied for lack of chronicity between what seemed to be a mild acute event in service and now having trouble 5 or 10 years later, that type of thing. You absolutely need somebody to argue on your behalf and explain why that was likely caused by the military. All right. Sorry, I got off here. John gets back. When you work with someone, do you review documentation? Then we get to talk. Yeah, most of the time. I wasn't really going to use this show to really promote what I do. Happy to work with anybody watching. I really am. But yeah, we just generally the process works like this. My assistant, the intake comes in either through our contact form on my website, or we have a landing page, or some people just email my assistant directly. And then she has you fill out this preliminary questionnaire. What conditions, just like 5 questions, what potentially would you want to look at? Then she tries to sort of help narrow that process down. Some people will reach out with like 12 different injuries they want to pursue. Well, they're not going to do all that at once, and so there's a reason we have a preliminary. Anyway, then after that, she's like, all right, if you're interested in moving forward with your knees or your shoulder and knee, if it's 2 or 3 things, go ahead and send the records. She has this thing where you get your records. Once it gets to that point, yes, she says, then she asks you, hey, do we have everything we need? Then and you say yes. Then she lets me know. I review them, and then depending on if I don't think I can win it or that it's not a good claim, I don't take on many of these. I was in service for 30 days. Had a sort of a nothing injury, and now 30 years later, I'm arguing this was caused by the military. And I'm sure a lot of that out there. I don't take any of that on. I only want to help vets that have cases that I think I can help you win. But if I think it's a good one, a lot of times we'll set up times to talk, especially if there's parts of it I just don't understand very well. But sometimes I will just say, hey, look, I can't do that, and short of a phone call. But a lot of times there's time to talk. All right, let's see where we are. I think that's what Robert was asking. So just reach out. Oh, very cool, in the Charleston area. Reach out to me or reach out to Jennifer. And again, same type of thing. One thing I don't do is calls at the front end of a process. I only do it, if I do them after I've reviewed the records. Otherwise, I do this outside of a full-time medical practice. I only work typically with 3 veterans at a time. In terms of writing letters, I have sort of 3 open, and I'm kind of working on them around my clinics and that kind of thing at any one time. But as of yesterday morning, or maybe this morning, we had 93 veterans that are sort of in the process of sending records and filling out questionnaires. We have this database, so we know where every veteran is in the system. And so I just can't do phone calls just with everybody just as feeling out. You got to get through our process of sending records and filling out questionnaires so I can review it before a call. Otherwise, I'd never have time to actually see my patients in my real practice. So, if that, it's just, hey, I just want to talk. I don't do a lot of that. I do, hey, I've reviewed your records. This is what I think. I do that. And they're typically extremely helpful. I love, it's so much fun talking to vets about all this stuff. But that we do sort of insist on that. And Robert, just so you know, I do this outside of my practice. So you would not be seeing me in my practice. It's completely separate from my medical practice. And the few physicians I know that do this sort of work, everybody does it outside of their practice. If you have a doctor that is willing to write a Nexus letter or do a DBQ, which I don't know of any orthopedic surgeons in America that do that, but if you find one, then you absolutely can do that. But I do it outside of my medical practice. There's no doctor-patient relationship is the key point there. Diagnosed in boot camp with scoliosis. Telehealth for a Nexus, would this diminish the chances of being in person? The Nexus letter doesn't matter. You can do that. I think I've had, of the 300 plus veterans that I've worked with, I think maybe 1 or 2 were in the Charleston area. Where the Nexus letter writer, where the expert is, does not matter for a Nexus letter. Where it matters is for a DBQ, the actual exam. They do tend to push back on telehealth exams. There are ways around that. I'm happy to talk about that at any point. We've kind of found that out a little bit through trial and error. And I have people, I did one early this morning on a veteran that just could not travel. And we documented the different reasons why, and that he had reached out to orthopedic surgeons in his area and nobody would do it. So there are ways around it, but just when you're talking physical exam and measurements and tests, reflexes for spine, and there's so many things, you really want to do that in person. And so that's, if you're doing a DBQ with the Nexus letter, ideally, you would travel, in my case at least, to see me in Charleston. Easily, the vast majority of the veterans I work with travel from all over the place to come in, stay overnight, do it the next morning, and then literally fly or drive out that same day. But Nexus letters, it does not matter where you are and where the Nexus letter writer is. Mike, C2 to T1 fusion, holy smokes. Yeah, he does. Front back fusion, gee whiz. The type of surgery actually doesn't matter that much, but yes, I've done multiple cervical spine letters on veterans that had fusions, but the type of surgery has almost nothing to do. And to be fair, I don't know that many of the C&P examiners would understand anterior versus posterior cervical fusion, instrumentation, graft. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, I've done a number that have had cervical fusions. ACDFs are the most common. And Robert says, luckily still have my service treatment and medical records. Yeah, that's always helpful. The more records, the better. Either, I have a whole thing about, lack of service treatment records is the most common reason for denial. It does happen. And there are ways we can work around that. But if you did report it in service, that obviously is a good thing. Medical records, obviously important too, but there's no question it can be hard to get these records, whether it's military or VA or private. I mean, I have a number of veterans that the clinic that they went to closed. And that is tricky, but you do the best you can. The lack of private records, especially if there's ways to document it, is not the bigger deal. It's the service treatment records that you really have to put effort in, because that's such an easy way, such an easy reason for the C&P examiners to deny. So you really have to do some work to explain why there aren't service treatment records. And he says, I have x-rays from the non-surgical spine center in Mount Pleasant. I suspect I actually know which one that is. I don't know any of those physicians, but I see the building all the time. Very cool. Well, that is great. You guys were great. Lots of great questions. I will be back here June 2nd, Monday, June 2nd, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're interested potentially in a Nexus letter, there is a link in the description below where you can pick up a free ebook that I wrote on the 8 most common reasons the VA denies service connection and how potentially you can beat each of those. And if you scroll further down, you can fill out just a name, email, phone number to sort of start the process of working with me. I made that process sound complicated, and I don't mean it to be, but when you're talking or mean it to sound that way, we just have we have processes to do this, and that's how we can work with 93, for instance, going through the process of submitting records right now, and we have to do it a certain way, but I promise we try to make it simple and quick, and I do try to write the letter that helps you the best I can in serving your claim. And if you never intend on working with me, I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions I can, and if I don't know the answer, like I did with John earlier I think it was John, about the 30% for the plantar fasciitis, I will look it up and get back. But contact me by email. I'm happy to help anytime. I very, very much admire military veterans for what they gave to their country, and I want to help any way I can, help them get the compensation, help you get the compensation you deserve. I hope you have a fantastic week or a fantastic month if I don't hear from you until beginning of June, but reach out anytime. Have a fantastic rest of your evening, and I will see you very soon. Take care.